The market doesn't know what keeps you up at night. It doesn't know when you want to retire, and it doesn't know how old you are. The simple truth is, the market doesn't care. But if you care, you've tuned into the right place. You're listening to Investor Resources, bringing clarity to the confusing world of finance. Here are your hosts of Investor Resources, Don Creech and Perry Sykes.
I'm Don Creech.
And I'm Perry Sykes, and welcome to the Investor Resources Podcast.
Well, the green energy movement is about to kick itself in its own backside. It has,
Which is a good trick, yeah.
It has significant problems that have been acknowledged in the back room, but largely ignored in the advertising department.
That's a good way to put it, yeah.
Electric vehicles are the focus of the media on adapting to green energy, along with windmills and solar. But what's up front are electric vehicles. And they are going to create some demand, but that demand is rapidly falling off the cliff as the difficulties of operation come to light. Correct. Whether it's cross-sector, go from residential need to school buses to industrial delivery trucks to major semi trucks. Each of these have different demands on power. We need a ton of power, and there's multiple benefits, clearly. The pandemic created the recognition that our supply chain is in jeopardy.
Quite fragile,
yeah. It's not controlled by us, which means we are at the mercy of our major adversary, China. And what are we going to do about that? Well, we bring in business home, manufacturing, industry's coming home. But what does industry mean? Well, they need employment. That's good for the economy. That's good for the region where they set up plants. That's good for taxes. But it's not good for the electrical grid because we're having difficulty providing power to bring those plants home. The power companies need to rebuild their infrastructure. That requires copper. We know that's in wiring. What we didn't think about was how do we get the copper lines from point A to point B? And that's created a massive demand for trees. And the green energy people don't want trees cut down, but in order to string new wire, higher quantity, higher quality, thickness, travel more, it requires bigger, taller, stronger, thicker trees to be treated.
Who would have thought it? Yeah, the electric vehicle, the newest bottleneck is trees. Just for the power poles, it's a power pole issue, and there are plenty of actually companies that do build them. It's just that it's really hard to ramp up a process that may take 25 years for a tree to grow large enough to use. And it turns out that's a very specific kind of tree that they're growing. If you have an average stand of trees, they say they can get 5 to 7 power poles per acre if you're not growing the right kind of trees. There are very few that are actually any good for that. And there's a huge shortage of power pole trees, and they're working on that right now. But it's going to take a while to get it. And then there are companies that build concrete poles, steel poles. They're all more expensive than the wooden ones, and they take more energy to produce. So it's that vicious cycle of, well, we need a lot more energy to produce this to sometime in the future save some energy. But right now there simply aren't enough poles to put up enough power lines to even deliver electricity, and the electricity doesn't exist anyway. That's the other side. Even if we had it, we can't deliver it. So there are some structural issues with the electric vehicle business that haven't been addressed, and they're always dismissed as, well, we're going to take care of that. We're on that. We're going to get to that. And now it turns out that, well, no, we're not. There's not a way to address that problem immediately. It's going to take a long, long time to get there, and that kind of infrastructure doesn't happen overnight. Even if you had access to enough of the trees to produce the power poles, we don't have enough. So it's going to be a while before we can clear that up.
There's only a couple of companies that are actually in the power pole business.
Right.
Pittsburgh
Not
Copper.
not something I'd ever thought about, actually, the power pole business. I was like, I don't know that business inside out, but you are correct. There's only a couple.
So one of the funny things about it is one of the major players in the business is in Pittsburgh, and the company's name is Coppers. When you think of coppers, you think of metal, right? Not
That's it.
power poles, wood
Not
and power
lumber.
poles. But the
Yep.
company's initial starts out with a K instead of a C. But they're building. They have new plants. They're building 3 new plants around the country to process as much as they can because demand is up so high. They've
Right.
had phenomenal results as far as the stock market is concerned. They've outperformed the S&P because there's a lot of demand for power poles. As I mentioned, the EV industry is under massive change also, and part of that is the delivery of power. One, we don't have infrastructure to do it. Two, batteries require that we use more steel. Even an electric vehicle has to be built with more steel than an
Right.
ICE vehicle, an internal combustion engine vehicle, because of the battery weight. And Perry, before we started this, we were talking about the truck company that had placed an order for
Right.
some semis.
They were going to convert their delivery warehouse to electric semis, and they put in their request with the city for here's how much power draw we want, and their response from the city was, "You've got to be joking. You're asking for a larger draw than the entire city uses. We don't have that kind of electricity. You can't get it." And so they immediately had to shut it down. They couldn't use it, and that's when they started taking a closer look and talking about the batteries there down there. Said those semis have two 4,000-pound batteries on them. So there's 8,000 pounds of just batteries to get those big 18 wheelers to roll on electricity. So the amount of power is immense. And with the power pole shortage, the power can't be delivered. And from what the city in New Jersey said, we can't even produce the electricity for it. They told them no. You can't have that much electricity. They need more power to run those electric trucks than it took to produce the electric trucks. So it's a huge draw, and then it's consistent. It doesn't go away. There's no flexibility to it. Those trucks are rolling every day. They need to recharge every day, and so there's a huge draw on the power grid. They just don't have it. It's not possible to deliver. So it's not that it's a problem that needs to be fixed. It's a problem that has to be addressed before there can be anything else that moves forward. And there's no one stepping up right now to say, here's the way we're going to fix it. The power company says we produce power, so it's an infrastructure problem. That's the city. And the city says, well, it's a power problem. Tell the power company to put some more poles up. And then you talk to the pole companies, they say, we don't have any more poles. What do you want to do about that? Nobody knows yet. No, there's a lot to be unwound, and it's not going to happen quickly. That's the main thing. It's not going to happen quickly. This is going to be a long flow problem, so it's going to take a while to address these. So this quick shift to electric vehicles just not going to happen as advertised.
Well, it's pretty well dying on the vine at the present. It's not going to go away. It's not dead. But you look
No,
at
it's
Ford and GM, which have both cut back production significantly. Part of that is the falling demand. The people who wanted to be EV friendly, for the most part, they're in. But
right.
the broader economy, they're sitting there saying, this really doesn't make any sense for me. I mean,
Right.
Rolls-Royce made an all electric Rolls. Now it cost $500,000. So if you got that laying around, I mean, you're interested, but it only goes 200 miles. Now Rolls by
200
themselves
miles.
are very, very heavy. So I don't know what the weight is when they put these batteries in it. But
Right.
one of the journalists asked, well, what's a guy going to do if he wants to go more than 200 miles in your new Rolls? He says, well, people who buy these, they have other cars. If they want to go more than 200 miles, they just take a different car. Okay, well, that's not the solution for the average household.
No, I don't have a spare Rolls Royce in my garage. Yeah, just for clarity there. Yeah, that's
So part of the problem with the falling demand is also the falling margin. First of all, the Ford and GM have been losing money on every EV they've made.
You bet.
And that's because Tesla dominates the EV business around the world. The Y class car is the world's
Right.
best seller on EVs. And he's
Yep.
been cutting costs and prices. And he's maintaining a smaller margin, but he still has margins. Nobody else does. It's going to be interesting to see what happens with Volkswagen, who said next year everything will be 100% EV, and see how
Right.
they survive that. But back to the pole business, you have to have plants that manufacture these poles. They've got to strip the bark off of them, and then they
Right.
have to be penetrated with preservatives so they can stand up.
They got to dry them,
And
treat them. Yep.
unlike forests that are managed by, say, Weyerhaeuser, for instance, they cut their trees down on a regular basis because that's part of how they make their margin. These
Sure.
trees are not something that anybody grows an entire forest or stand of. I mean, there's
Right.
a stand of trees. It's about halfway between Portland and Ontario, Oregon, and that stand of trees is manufactured or raised for paper pulp.
Okay.
And
Yep.
we used to make that trip regularly for family. And every 10 years, it was a clear lot.
Gone. Yeah.
It was gone,
Yep.
turned into paper. Nobody's doing that with these poles for power. They're selectively searched out and harvested, but then you have
Right.
to wait probably, as you said earlier, I think 25 years in order to get a big enough tree with enough girth to handle the weight that's straight enough to be
Right.
able to be put into use. And
That's a new job at the pole companies. One of the new jobs is a scout. They're paying people just to drive around looking at timber stands and trying to identify trees that are going to be good. They'll identify them and tell the owner, "Hey, don't cut that one down. Save it for us." And they'll of course pay him a premium for that, to leave that tree alone. But they're valuable enough now that there are actually people driving the countryside looking for stands of trees and identifying trees that might be good for power poles, and then paying up to the owners to make sure they leave those alone and let them get big enough to use them for power poles. So the demand is high.
so in the industry, it is not new. But when you move outside the industry itself and deal with the people who are driving the move to green energy, most of
Yes.
them are totally unaware of the problem of delivery, trying to find a 40-foot tall straight tree, much
Correct.
less the restrictions on mining, because we could generate some of our precious metals that we need for batteries, components, and so on, except that you can't get through the EPA in 10 years, and then you have to go through courts for another 10 years before your mining permit is approved. And then
Yep.
a copper mine takes about 10 years to generate production. So solving this
Long
problem is
flow.
very long term.
Yep. Yep. Long
And
term.
I think we're pretty long enough on this session. So
Good
let's
enough.
call it a wrap.